Hey everybody, it's Emily from Life Sew Savory, and today we're going to be sewing a cozy, cuddly cardigan. At least that is the hope. So I'm going to be using my free t-shirt pattern that I designed several years ago and making just a couple of adaptations to try to turn it into something cozy and cuddly for my daughter. So she, of course, with the changing weather, is trying to decide what to wear in the morning and what to wear to school, and we need more layers. So I thought a cardigan would be a great place to start. And the one she has is covered in flowers, and so it goes with nothing. So we're going to make one today out of this cute yellowy orange fall cozy sweater fabric, and hopefully make something cozy for her. So let me go ahead and just do a couple things on here, and then we'll go ahead and get started. And I'm excited that you guys are here and following along and saying hi from all over. It's going to be a fabulous show today, so hopefully we can have a really successful time here. So I am still having such a weird time sharing anything. I don't understand what's going on. Actually, I would love it if someone on my Facebook page could hit the share button under the video and see if you can share it. You don't actually have to go through with it, but do you see a share button? Because I will like get all the way to the end and then there's nothing. It's so weird on my end. So that obviously has been a Facebook update that I don't know what I'm doing. So anyway, yay! So some of you checking in from the UK. Sounds like it's maybe a little bit rainy over there, but hopefully you guys are doing well, and yeah, it's hopefully nice over there. So let's see what we can do. Anyway, so I'm just trying a couple things here, and I'm gonna see if I can share this video a non-traditional way, and we'll get started. So anyway, so like I said, I started by printing the t-shirt pattern that's kind of like the boys style, which means it's just a little bit baggier than the girls fitted. So I have a more fitted t-shirt pattern, and then I have a looser fit t-shirt pattern. Okay, so I'm starting with the looser fit. Oh, thank you, Jane. I don't know what's going on. Let's see. Yeah, it's definitely being weird here. Anyway, but so I started with the looser fit t-shirt pattern, and I'm going to show you just a couple of edits that I made, and then we'll get started. So I think that is what is going on here, and my mom's visiting this week, which is fun. We are redoing some of the trim in our house, so things are a little bit, I don't know, moved all over, shall we say? We have a lot going on around here, but I'm finishing up some things today, and then hopefully going to be putting furniture back. I did some like finishing up in this area so that I could do the show today, and then we'll be getting started. So, okay. So I don't know, found a weird workaround that I was able to share at a couple spots. Oh, you know what I didn't do though is share to my group. So let me go ahead and do that, because I know several people check in there and want to see what we're doing. So last week I was taking like someone to the airport, or I just wasn't able, I didn't do a show last week. So if you don't see me on, it's probably because something else is going on. I'm trying to at least get and sew every other week live with you guys, and sometimes I am able to like put up a note and say no show today. But anyway, if you don't see me, I'll be back the next week. Chances are good. Okay, so what did I do? So let's start with the sleeve, because this didn't have very many edits. But what I did is I just made the sleeve a little bit wider by extending about a 1/2 inch on either side of the shoulder curve. So you can just see I just added a tiny bit here. And of course, the looser you want your sleeve, I want this to be able to be worn over a t-shirt. So I want it a little bit wider. And then I did that all the way down to the cuff thing, the cuff edge. And then I cut, look at, we're using this super cozy, cuddly fabric. So hopefully that will be good. So that's all I did on the sleeves. I've also cut 2 cuffs. Okay, so double wide there. And then the back, remember we made the sleeve wider, so we also need to make the armhole wider so that sleeve can fit on there. So here I added that same sort of 1/2 inch on the edge here on the arm, so that we have a little bit bigger armhole. So if you're wearing a t-shirt underneath, hopefully you know it can fit over. And then all the way down, just to give a little bit more, this is gonna be an open front cardigan, so it's gonna be loose, but I just gave a little more room on the side. So that's all I changed on the back. Now the front has a little bit more modification. So let me try to explain what I did. So the first thing I did is I cut, again, we added that 1/2 inch to the side seam. Okay, so added the 1/2 inch to the side seam. Then the front, we did not cut it on the fold like you normally would a t-shirt. And you can see here, instead of this going out and down, right, we normally have a neckline that comes down. I've just sort of rounded it from the shoulder because we're just going to put a binding on there and we kind of want it to just round down there. So I did that, and then I also did the same thing at the bottom. So instead of this coming straight down and then going over, this is the bottom, I've also rounded this. So we have this fun sort of cocoon curved shape on the front. And we've all seen those cozy cardigans, right? That they are just curved here and around, and that's the shape we're going for. Then I've also cut this binding, which we will use to sew all the way around the neckline and down around the back of the shirt. And now as I'm thinking about this, I cut enough, because I was just thinking about going down the neckline, but I forgot it's going to go all the way around the back. And I'm thinking I need to make sure I cut a little bit more, and I might need to piece it together. So let me just do a really quick measure here. So this, yeah, this is only enough for the front and like around the neck, but I also need to go around the back. So let me dig out some scraps. Of course, I had already like tossed my scraps, but I think I have some pieces big enough. Okay, well, and I'm glad I remembered now, not halfway when we were sewing. So I'm going to just put this down a little bit, and we're going to do the best we can to cut a couple. We might have to piece a couple pieces here. So I have already used this orange fabric to make a full-size women's sweater. So I'm kind of piecing together enough fabric to have a kid-size one here. So I cut my binding 2.5 inches wide so that when we fold it over and sew it on, it will be just over 1 inch wide all the way around the outside of that sweater. Okay, so we're just going to grab a couple more sections here. I think those 2 pieces should be enough, but what we will save this out until we make sure that these are enough, and then we can piece together our binding. So, all right, so let's grab all of these pieces now. This is a fun project because we should be able to sew it entirely on the serger. And the yellow fabric I'm using is very furry, so it's a little bit getting all over me, but it should be good. So we're gonna start just with some basic construction of the top. And again, this should be super easy. And this fabric is a little bit hard to tell right sides. So hopefully I can do this here. All right, so I'm going to start by sewing the 2 shoulder seams together. I'm going to sew one and pin one. Since I have those right sides lined up, I'm going to try to keep it lined up. Oh no, Debbie, did it come unthreaded or did you take the thread out? That is never good news when you're trying to do it and it's not behaving. All right, okay, that's the right one. I had all these machines unplugged because I had everything pulled out from the window here. So this is a pretty medium weave sort of sweater fabric. So I want to make sure that my seam allowance takes a not too big of a chunk, but a nice chunk of it to make sure that we're securing our seams. So you can see I'm using dark thread and hopefully getting those seams attached nicely. I have sewn with this fabric before and I didn't have any trouble with the seams coming apart, but I always worry just a little bit more with sweater fabric to make sure that I'm really catching those seams so we don't have holes. Where I find sometimes I have holes with sweaters is like on the cuffs or places that I really, sorry, I need to get down here and rearrange this presser foot. Where I really like pulled it, then sometimes it's not as secure in there. All right, so let's see. So let's sew on now the sleeve. Okay, so I'm gonna open this up to oh boy. Look what I did. I sewed the front on sideways. Okay, so we're just gonna cut it off. That was not how I wanted to start this tutorial. So you could pick out the shoulder seams, but I'm gonna lose this 1/4 inch here. And you'll have to see later when I post photos if it worked out. But I don't want to take the time to pick this out. So I'm just going to cut this off. Plus this sweater fabric, ugh, so messy. All right, so what I did is I put the sides on, or the fronts on, mixed up. So I didn't have my armholes lined up, which is a good thing to check, okay? So make sure you have your armholes here lined up, and then your curved front on the other side. And I didn't check that. Okay, so now we have that checked. And hopefully we can sew this again and then sew the armholes on. All right, so you can see I'm just looking really carefully here, and that is, again, this fabric is really strange trying to tell the front and the back. So as long as, I mean, when you have a fabric that you have a hard time telling the front and the back, the good news is it doesn't really matter. Like, there's no fabric police that are going to tell you that's the wrong side showing. I mean, if it's that close that you can't tell, no one else is going to be able to tell either. I just want to make sure that I'm being consistent in which side I have as my right side, right? Because sometimes you'll be able to tell if I mix it up as I'm sewing. So that's really my goal here, is just to make sure that I'm keeping the same side that's going to be the back, and at the same time it's going to be the front. So this is the side I'm going with, that's the front. This is the side that's going with the back. You can see it is super, super similar. But up close, I can tell a little bit. I mean, I can tell. It just, I have to be aware. Okay, so I am going to pin or clip the two outer edges, and then I'm going to ease my curves together, working my way in towards the center. Okay, so we played a little bit with the size of this sleeve. So sometimes when you do that, you have to do a little bit of easing, but I added the same extra to both sides of the sleeve. So really it shouldn't be too big of a deal. And as I see, it's going on here just perfectly. So while I'm in the pinning mood, I'm gonna go ahead and do the other side as well. This is kind of like a fuzzy sort of chenille-ish fabric. I bought it, at least, it's probably 2 years now. So this is not anything current, but it is really cozy. The only problem I've had with it is that when it comes out of the wash, it's so staticky. So where you're like wearing something and it's all clinging to you. I usually have to spray with like a static guard when it comes out. Maybe I should throw in 2 dryer sheets. I'm not sure how to get it to not be quite so staticky, but it is a very cozy fabric. So we're gonna sew this up, and I think this might be the last piece of it I have. And I've sewed several things with different colors of this fabric. So, all right, so that is what I'm sewing along here. Again, taking sort of a 3/8 inch seam allowance along that sleeve or along the shoulder, and sewing that side together. And we're going to sew this side. So what I'm hoping is that you could sort of create this cozy cardigan look from any t-shirt pattern, right? Whether you use the one I did, or whether you already have a t-shirt pattern that you love and you think, oh, I could just cut it open in the front, add a couple of curves, and make your own cardigan. So I'm sort of hoping that this experiment will work out, and then you can replicate it yourself to make a super cozy top. So it is definitely fall layering weather here, because the mornings are cool and then it starts to get really warm in the afternoon. So, all right, let's take a look at how this is coming. And it's actually starting to get a little bit of the feel of the sweater. So you can see we have a sleeve, and we have another sleeve, and then we have the front here that has this sort of curved edge here. Okay, so we're hoping that will be a really cozy wrap, totally open. This kind of sweater, you can usually add like one button if you want in the middle, but you definitely don't have to. So let's see if we can stretch our cuffs big enough to go on the end of our sleeve. If we can't, then we will need to gather the end of the sleeve a little bit, but looks like we're good with the cuff. So I'm going to add the cuff on now, not later, and stretch as I sew to put this cuff on the bottom of the sleeve. So now I'm sewing 3 layers of this sweater fabric, because the cuff has 2 layers and then 1 layer of the sleeve. So, a little bit chunky there, but Oh my goodness, look at that super cozy cuff. I love it. And this is what I love. This whole project will be done with cuffs and bands, so you really can sew the whole thing on your serger and not have to worry about like top stitching or anything like that. I find sweater fabric easiest if I can just sew it all on the serger. If I have to top stitch or do another seam on another machine, then I don't know, it gives me more trouble. So you could sew this whole thing with like a zigzag stitch on your sewing machine. So if you don't have a serger, it's not impossible, just a little trickier to make sure that your seams are stretchy and lay nice. But you could also use this same idea without sweater fabric and use like French terry or something for the cardigan that you can sew easier on a different machine. Okay, definitely does not have to be sweater fabric. That's just what we're using. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put the sleeve wrong sides together and we're going to sew the side seams. So sew down the sleeve and down the side seam of the sweater. Then the only thing we'll have left to do is add our big cuff, but we have to do a little bit of piecing because like I said, I am using scraps, so I didn't have enough fabric to cut one long piece. And I probably wouldn't have had enough to cut one anyway, but maybe I could have gotten away with two instead of, I think I'm gonna have to use 3 pieces. But we'll see, we'll measure here when we get this all put together, then we'll be able to measure. So I'm just sewing down the underarm of the sleeve. And again, I'm hoping, this is kind of my prototype, so I will be making another one if I need to make any adjustments. But I want the sleeve to be loose enough that it can be worn over a t-shirt or another shirt. Probably a t-shirt or tank for layering. So we want it a little bit bigger than you normally would a sleeve. I also should say that I did shorten the sides of the t-shirt by about 2 inches because we're gonna be adding our cuff, and I don't want this quite as long as I would a t-shirt. I want it to hit a little bit more like the top of your pants, not a couple inches past where you might have a t-shirt sort of hang down. So you can compare this to either measure your child or compare this to another top that you have when you're using the pattern for length. But I did not use the full length of the t-shirt, the original t-shirt pattern. All right, so again, sewing down the sleeve. Lining up the underarm. And then sewing down the side of the sweater with the bottoms matching. Okay, now before I turn this right side out, I'm going to go ahead and just finish the end of the cuff here because I put my cuff on first and then I sewed the side seam. I do have this loose thread here that I need to deal with, so I'm going to thread it back through the serger seam to get rid of that and finish that cuff. We're going to do the same thing with the other one. I feel like I have sweater fluff down my throat all of a sudden. Okay, so let's turn this right side out and take a look at how this is looking so far. I also did cut out the sort of appropriate size t-shirt. I didn't upsize the t-shirt. We just made those other modifications that I showed you at the beginning. We added a little bit to the arms to make them wider. We added a little bit to the side seam to make it just a little bit cozier and wider there. And then we shortened it just a little bit. But you could always like use a couple, one or two sizes larger of the t-shirt as well to get sort of a looser cardigan feel. So can we see the front? I think we can here. Okay, so you can see this is the front side, but the rest of it is looking so super cute. Look at that cuff. Can you see how cozy it is through the screen? You almost just want to touch it, don't you? All right, so now we have to have enough binding to go all the way down one side, around the back, up the other side of the front, and around the back. It's going to be one continuous loop. So we will actually sew it into a circle, but I'm actually gonna wait until I get closer around to close the circle so that I can not have to have an exact measurement. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna take my long piece. I do have one really nice long piece here, and I'm gonna sew on one of these other pieces, sew it together, and then we're gonna kind of estimate to see if we think this is long enough, and can I get away with just piecing two together rather than three, because then we can be a little bit more strategic about putting our seams in a less apparent location, probably towards the back, around the bottom, not seams up towards the neckline. Okay, so I'm going to start my measure here at this shoulder seam, and I'm gonna put a clip so I can know where I started and where to stop. So remember, we're going to be folding, this in half. Okay, it's a little over an inch wide because I cut it 2.5 inches, and just sewing it on kind of like a band or a binding all the way along this sweater. So we will stretch it slightly as we're sewing, but not a lot. Okay, so as I'm measuring this around here, I'm stretching it just a tiny bit, but really not very much, because yeah, it's not super stretchy fabric to begin with, and I don't want it to look distorted. Okay, so we might be pretty good here. We're going up the other side of the front, but we do have to get around the back of the neck. Okay, I think we can make this work. To go all around with this. So where do I want my seams? I actually really want them more on the bottom, not around the top. So I am going to, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to, let's see, start with the long side. So we'll go up the front of it. Those are paper scissors. We got 3 pairs of scissors here. Only one works really well. I'm going to leave a tail so that we can sew the ends together when I get back around. Okay, so I am going to, maybe I will just clip it, and then if I clip it, I can sew into a circle before I sew it. Shall we do that? All right, so we're going to stretch the band just slightly and clip it all the way around the outside of this cardigan. Okay, so we made nice curved seams on the front, so we do not have any sharp angles or corners. Everything around this whole front and bottom should be smooth curves. So if you have sharp angles, you need to smooth those off as you're doing this so that everything pins on nicely. Okay, so that was up one side. Now we're going around the back of the neck. This would be another place you could put a seam if you wanted, is on the back of the cardigan neck. sometimes I put seams on the backs just so my kids know what's the back. But this one is open front, so we should not have any trouble telling what's the back. Okay, then we're going down the other side of the front. Okay, so Jane, I did cut it a little bit on the bias, not a true bias, because that was how I got the most fabric out of it. So this was operation cutting from scraps this morning. So I did cut that long piece that I showed you. That longest piece was cut on the bias out of necessity. It allowed me to get a little bit more length out of it. That second piece that I cut at the beginning of the show was cut more on the straight. So whatever you think is going to give you like the best sort of stretch, recovery, and final outcome is what I would suggest sewing. I have made lots of sort of banded sweater cardigans for myself, and I don't always cut it on the bias. I often will just cut it sort of straight across. All right, let's see how we're doing. We're getting close. Can you guys see here? Here's my sweater. The ends are gonna meet, and it's gonna look awesome. So actually, I am just going to, before I get too close, I'm gonna take these two ends. See how I worked my way around? Then I was able to see where to sew this together into a circle. So you don't always have to know all those measurements ahead of time. There's a lot of it you can sort of measure and create these pieces as you are going, and then not have to, know all the final things before you get started. You could also create this band wider. That would be a cute look too. Instead of a 1-inch band, it could be closer to 2 inches. Really up to you how you want this to look. So now I have this pinned all the way around. So you can see how it's pinned on both sides of the front. Okay, both sides of the front and on the bottom. But once we sew this, it's gonna be super fun because it's actually gonna be finished. So then we just would like press our seams, wash it, and we're ready to go. So let's sew the band on the bottom, and I'm gonna be, go a little bit slow because I have 3 layers, 2 layers of the band and 1 layer of the sweater, and I don't really want any holes, so I want to make sure that I'm catching all of these layers of the fabric. And again, stretching the binding a bit as I sew. Not a ton, but enough. We want it to, sort of give a shape to that outer edge of the cardigan. We don't want it loose and floppy. So make sure you are stretching, and you can see I'm sort of releasing the clips before I get to it to adjust the tension a little bit, and you can go ahead and do that as you want to adjust the stretch and the feel. And depending on what you're using for a binding, you might really be able to stretch it. Like if you are using a French terry fabric or a cotton lycra fabric that really is stretchy, go ahead and give it a nice tight binding. Sweater fabric is not as good for stretching and using as bindings, which is why you need to make sure it's nice and wide, because if it's too thin, it will just lose its shape entirely and look stretched out. So you don't want that either. So binding with sweaters, like I've made some sweaters, and then when I put the neck binding on, I always have to be a little bit creative or modify the pattern that I'm using to create a wider binding, or not stretch it quite as much. But it just is a little bit different using sweater for binding. So just make sure you're catching those layers. You could definitely you could also test what you're doing to see, okay, is this going to be stretched too much, not enough, on some scrap fabric before you actually sew the binding on the fabric. So up to you. But we are almost back around on the bottom of the binding. You can see where we started here. Of course, orange thread would be best, but I don't usually change the color threads on my serger. So I will press these seams and it will, should give it a nice shape for the cardigan. But I think we have some real potential here. So I'm just flipping that binding out. And then here is our super cute sweater. And can you see the front curved edge there? And the other, it's like also orange. It's hard to see, but we do have the front binding coming around there, and it looks cozy and cuddly, and hopefully, let me get it back here a little bit so you can see, but doesn't that look super cute and cozy, and should be a really great fall winter sweater. So I will post photos of how this looks on Rose in my pattern group later today. And I might even write up a post for the website next week, maybe about how to make some of these edits to create a really cute cardigan look. So look for that, and or check out at the very beginning of this video, I told you sort of how I modified the pattern pieces to create this look. But now I kind of want to make one of these for myself. So the women's boyfriend tee is a loose fit t-shirt pattern, so it would also work great. So maybe that's my next thing, is to edit and make a cute cardigan for myself, because I have sort of a really loose, like no shoulder cardigan, but this one with the more like traditional shoulder look might be a fun one too. So anyway, thank you for joining me today. I think this turned out so cute and cozy, and I can't wait to see Rose wearing it, and we will be sewing something else fun next week, so I hope you'll join me then. Bye. Have a good day.